My name is Shaun. I'm an encaustic painter and instructor, and I am the founder of Northwest Encaustics, which is where we're at now. Been here about 2 years. This is located in West Seattle, near the Fauntleroy Ferry.
And how is it that you found this location?
I live in this area, and I had seen, I got a call from Kelly Lyles, a local artist that runs an email list of sorts for other artists, and she notified me of the space. And so I came and checked it out, and it was perfect for my needs. So,
how did you go about finding, or rather founding, your studio?
Well, at the time, Larry Calkins was teaching numerous classes every quarter at Pratt, and I was his teacher's assistant at that point. And we had a waiting list every class, usually double the size of the class for a waiting list. In addition, people were asking for any place that they could go to a ready-made studio to work in it. And since none of that was available, when this building became available, and it was fit my needs and was in my neighborhood, I just decided to go for it. This used to be a private school and daycare for a church that's adjacent to it. And they had sold to another congregation that didn't have a school, so it sat vacant for a few years. Something to do with the zoning, they couldn't put condos in here, and so a friend of mine, Randy McCoy, bought the building and turned it into art studios. So we've got 3 stories and 12 studios in this building.
And how many instructors do you have?
Currently, there's 1, 2, 3 other instructors in addition to myself that teach out of this space. And we teach everything from beginning encaustic, advanced encaustic, working with encaustic in photography, and we do a monotype encaustic, which is more of a printerly approach to working with encaustic paints.
Could you tell me about your involvement in the Seattle artistic scene?
Yeah, I was originally a printmaker and had been studying printmaking for quite some time, and was pretty involved in Pratt and working as a teacher's assistant and doing other stuff there when Larry Calkins, a local local encaustic painter, was asked to do a master artist intensive there, and I worked as his teacher's assistant. And we hit it off really well and just worked well together, so we continued to work together, and I continued to be his assistant and just kind of learned encaustic by being around it that way.
Could you give me a brief description of what encaustics is?
Yeah, encaustics is the ancient art of painting with hot beeswax. It's over 2,000 years old. We take beeswax and we melt it down and melt in damar, which is a pitch from a tree, and mix in powdered pigments to make our paints. And then you set them on a hot plate and paint with them hot. And they immediately cool off, and then you take a secondary heat source and you heat it back up in order to get it to fuse properly. And that's what encaustic means, which is to burn in.
So you make your own line of encaustics then?
We do make our own line of encaustic paints. We'd been making paint since the very beginning. I'd learned it from Larry Calkins, and we had a pretty loose approach to making paint. You're melting your filtered white beeswax, and you're grinding up damar, which is a pitch from a tree, and mixing that in, and then mixing in pigments to make the paint. When I decided that I was constantly telling students how to make their own, and there is some safety hazards that be considered when you're working with powdered pigments. And I noticed that at least half of them were purchasing their own ready-made paint. I thought, we've got nobody out here that makes it and sells it, so why not do it? So I started the approach last year. We're still pretty new at it. But I learned a lot. It was really interesting. Developed a filtering process that was a lot more elaborate. I started buying some larger commercial candle making equipment for working on larger scales. Started milling my paint, which I hadn't done before, so that I could come up with a consistent recipe that was going to be the same now as in the same can a year from now. I wanted it to be real professional.
Now I've noticed that encaustic paints tend to be expensive. Why is that the case?
They are expensive. Well, it kind of depends on how you look at it. When you're looking at that same volume in an oil paint, it doesn't seem that expensive. but you do tend to use a bit more. And I think also part of it is there are only a handful of manufacturers making encaustic paint, and they make it, it's extraordinarily strong with pigments. So people buy the paint and then they add clear encaustic medium to extend it. So although it is expensive, you can get a lot of paint from one can. So like this is, it also depends on the pigment. This is cadmium red. This is a very, very strong pigment. So I can probably add 6 or 7 times the amount of this can of clear wax to it and make that much paint out of this can. So it just depends on how you want to work with it. If you want it really super opaque, you can work with it straight, or you can thin it down considerably. And that's 6 or 7 times the amount of this. You can do that before you actually start to get any transparency to it. So you can really extend it significantly. I think that's part of the reason, and it was an industry standard. I think R&F was the company that first started selling it and making it commercially, and they've been doing it the longest. And so those of us that have followed have kind of followed their pigment load, that heavy pigment load.
So with this bad economy, how do you get students interested in the art of encaustics?
Usually there's just, people see the work around town, and now that we're seeing more and more of it, they're intrigued by it. It has a real luminous quality. There's a lot of translucency to it. You can get a lot of depth in it that you can't get in other mediums. So there's a demand that's already out there for it. We do really very minimal advertising. We put our classes on Artist Trust lists, Teach Street. We have our own email list that goes out. But we haven't done any real commercial advertising. And that's, that in and of itself has been enough.
Could you give us a brief description of each of your basic offerings?
Yeah, the beginning encaustic is we're going over the history of encaustic, how to use it safely, basic setup you would need if you wanted to work with it on your own, and then we go through and touch on numerous different approaches to working with encaustic, from painterly to working with printmaking techniques to transferring already existing images. We just kind of cover a range of stuff in the beginning encaustic classes, or also the 8 weeks classes, the same kind of approach. We have an encaustic, the second step, that Larry Calkins teaches. It's for people that have a basic understanding but want to take it a little bit further within their own artwork. Then we have the monotype encaustic class, which we actually bring out these large plates and heat the plates up, and then you paint and draw directly on the plate and then lay paper into that. And then pull it back up and see what you've done and work back and forth that way. So it's kind of it's definitely a monotype printerly approach to working with encaustics. And then in addition, we have a photography class. There's a large interest in working with photography and encaustic. And that instructor is Daniel Sanger, and you send him your digital images and he prints them on specific types of paper. And then we go over mounting and laying down wax and the various techniques you can do on top of photographs to enhance them. I don't think I mentioned that the monotype class is taught by Kamala Kakaria.
What are your thoughts about the Northwest encaustic scene?
It's pretty exciting right now because it's been growing seemingly exponentially, considering how few people knew what it was, 10 years ago. And including people that have been working in the arts. And I still occasionally have artists asking me to explain what it is, but most people that are working around the arts are fairly familiar with it now. There's been numerous people coming out with books, more and more classes. Back when I first got involved in it, Pratt was the only place teaching it in Seattle.
How do you compare with the European encaustic artists or encaustic techniques?
We're going with a more traditional approach to as far as making the paint and the medium and how we're working with it. As far as what we're incorporating with the encaustic paintings, we do a lot of experimental stuff that I haven't seen anyplace else. It's starting to branch out from here, I think. Working with materials that people don't normally associate with any type of paint. Working with graphite, working with wood glue, inks and paints. Inks and paints are pretty traditional, but we've got some unusual techniques working with clay slips and cloth and paper. It's a medium that's really open to experimenting with numerous different other art forms that are out there. From 2D bisque-fired clay sculptures to working with cloth and paper and doing book arts. It's a medium that you can incorporate with almost every other type of paint medium that's out there, with the exception of acrylic. Acrylic doesn't work well with encaustic because it's essentially a plastic and doesn't fuse very well. But oil painting, watercolor, traditional print arts, casein or milk paint, tempera, all of these things can be incorporated with encaustic. So it leaves you wide open to a lot of experimenting. So here we have a hot plate with numerous different colors of hot wax on it. I'm going to put down a little bit of clear wax on a painting that I'm currently working on. And so this is ideally right about 185 degrees. So it's hot, but it's not, you know, burn yourself real bad hot. And as you paint it on, it cools immediately in, you know, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. So that's one of the things that people like about it, is it's so immediate, you don't have to wait for anything to dry. So that is already, I can pick this up and move it and the paint's not going to run off. But after you paint it on hot, then you need to reheat it up with a secondary heat source in order for it to fuse properly. And we use a couple of different things here. For small work, we use these little micro torches like you use for creme brulee. And just heat it up, and that melts it and levels it off and pops the bubbles and smooths it out. It does get cloudy right after it cools off, but that, as it continues to cool, goes away. And then for larger stuff, we use these propane torches, and they're a lot faster and a lot hotter, so you kind of got to control it, or you can mess up your whole painting. And that's pretty much the way they work. I mean, you can work everything. You have to use natural bristle brushes. You can do everything from really small stuff to really large stuff. They do some wonderful blending because they act differently than other paints because of the heat. You paint two layers, and as you heat them up, they start interacting with each other, and some things will float to the top and others will float to the bottom, and they'll make some really wonderful patterning. You do have to stir them a little bit if they've been sitting for a while, because some of the pigments are heavier than others, so they'll float to the bottom.
And how do you make textures like impasto?
There's these tools, these wood burning tools. I don't know if you guys remember these from when we were kids and got those little kits. We use these and turn down the heat. When you plug these straight into the wall, they're a little too hot, so we run them through a regulator. There's a regulator right here on the table. And so this, plugged into a regulator, we can turn the heat down to whatever level we want. And we can turn it low enough that it melts the wax as you're putting it on and can create texture. So if I get this down low enough, it's almost like frosting a cake. And then you can just push this around and make hills and valleys, and it's really nice. And the other nice thing about this is you can work cold wax. So I can take a cold chunk of waxed paint and then draw on here with this tool. Everything from a nice line to controlling where I want it to go. It's one of the ways you can work with nice detail. It's slow, but it's kind of meditative. I really like it. You can do some nice blending. To mix, like the painting right here that I'm working on, the white and blue, you know, is blent with this little tool here. And it works quite well. And then working on the larger paintings where you're painting with the hot wax, as you heat it up, it smooths out. And that's one of the marks that a lot of the people that have been working with encaustic painting for a long time, controlling that and being able to get a smooth, flat surface. But I've kind of found the more I worked with it that I really kind of like the texture. I kind of force that.
And do you work with pig bristle hairs, or?
I actually work with really cheap brushes. The cheaper the better. Some things, like when I'm laying down layers of clear or large areas of a solid color, I do like these hockey brushes. But a lot of these things, they're just, as long as it's natural bristle, you don't need anything really fine. I mean, you can, but since it's not necessary.
And what about hair loss into the work? Is that an issue?
Occasionally I see a hair poking out and I'll just pull it out. But for the most part, they do pretty good. I mean, these are cheap chip brushes from the hardware store. So, I mean, I do know people that spend a lot of money on brushes, but it just seems to me that it doesn't make a huge difference in the way the wax goes down the way it might with paint, because it's a different way of working. And then you can carve into this stuff too. So all of these lines are carved with lino block carving tools. So you can really do a lot. I can embed papers and cloths into encaustic painting and use the translucency, take advantage of the translucency to collage with it in. You can transfer images. There's a great process where we take photocopied images and transfer them onto tissue paper. And then when you suspend them in clear beeswax, the tissue paper becomes translucent and you can see through it. But whatever image you transferred onto there from the photocopy stays there. So it's a nice way to get some, especially for showing beginning students how to get some mark making in that they have a little control over. Because working with the wax and making it do exactly what you want to do can be a little challenging at first. But that's kind of the fun of it too. So we have an office here in the back where we have Wi-Fi and a copy machine and some art books and a couch when I haven't got it buried with stuff. This is a glass top inking table for some printmaking techniques we do. We'll roll out inks with brayers on here and do some different processes that we can incorporate with the encaustic. And our little mini kitchen. Back here we keep some of the odder materials, clay washes, where we take clay and water it down and paint with it. Shellacs, basic brush cleaners, and in our sink for working. These larger tables are where either the students or the renters will do their work. They'll work off of these hot plates. The tabletops are covered with sheetrock, although it doesn't look like it anymore after you get that much wax spilled on them. I think they do get a beautiful patina though. And then we have an outdoor area, which I'm just building a roof on. So, because there's a couple techniques we do that are a little stinky, so we want to do that outside. But this is getting to be covered so that we'll have to be able to work out in the rain. This is a rolling demo station, so I can roll this out into the middle of the room and people can gather around when we're showing specific techniques. This is where we make a lot of our wax, from the smaller batches here in these deep fat fryers to the larger batches in this commercial wax melting equipment. For the class, we'll make up, as well as what's on their hot plate, we'll make up cakes of colored wax that they can just drop in when they start getting low. And then we keep all of our pigments over here. And then this is the line of paint that we're starting to make and sell. And then here in the back room is just where all of our tools are. We keep a wide variety of tools in all these different drawers, from drawing tools and marking tools and picture hanging equipment, all this kind of stuff. And then we also have our paper racks down in here and paper cutters. The books back here are used for altering and tearing out, and racks for
You use paper more than you use masonite?
We actually don't use masonite. We've been either making our own panels to paint on, because encaustic painting has to be done on a rigid substrate. It can't be done on a stretched canvas. Or buying these ones out of Canada called elephant boards. I've been buying those quite a bit. And then the larger panels, the stuff I'm working on, is actually hollow core doors that I cut up and then paint on top of. So they work pretty good. They're lightweight and you can do large panels out of them. But and then for classes, we work on cut sanded plywood that I cut down into specific shapes.
Now, you mentioned renters. Can you tell me more about that setup there?
Yeah, for anybody that has some experience with encaustic painting, either having taken a class here or having some background in working with it, we have a rental program here where you can rent by the day, week, or the month. It's available currently on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And you would rent prearranged, because I have to have myself or a monitor in here. And basically the rental covers the use of the space, the use of the tools, and the medium. You would bring your own panels or your own extra equipment that you work with that you can combine, but the paint and the tools and the space are all available. This is our corridor gallery, which we're only open essentially for the opening on second Thursdays. So this is Leslie Nan Moon, who works with relief prints. And on this floor we have two other studios. There's a ceramic studio and then a sculpture studio. And then we have some artwork hanging in the stairs here, and the stairs take us up to the lobby of the building. It's really a great mid-60s building. I mean, so many art buildings are in really old warehouse spaces that are hard to heat and don't have all the accoutrements you need, but this building is built in the mid-60s, and you know, it's got windows that work and heat and electricity. We're really happy to be here. And it's a great group of artists that are involved in this community. Well, you can go to the Northwest Encaustic website, where we have a list of all of our classes, and soon we'll have a list of our encaustic paint that's available for sale. We also have a gallery for our monthly shows and an archive going back at least a year for the shows that we have every month. So there's a lot of nice work to see and a lot of different approaches to it. Feel free to come by and visit us anytime we've got a workshop going on, or send me a question if you have it at classes@nwencaustic.com.